Well, hello. Welcome back to the second part of my story. So, where I left you off was that I had gone through the dark night of the soul, that I had dealt with a major betrayal, and one that I learned to reconnect with myself and recognize how I had been betraying myself for years. And in that time, I was also very cognizant of my feminine uh, and my masculine, and how I had lived primarily in my masculine energy up to that betrayal. And that isn't conducive to a relationship, but it's also unhealthy for me as a woman to be driving that hard all the time. There is a burnout that we experience when we do that that is far greater than what a man would experience when he is in his masculine energy. And so I stepped into my feminine energy, which was creative and flowing and nurturing and lacked drive until I finally thought, okay, I have to bring in the masculine again, which is what happened. And I stepped into that masculine and I started moving and driving until the day of my accident. I wasn't even going fast. I was going 25 miles an hour. I was in my brand new little Kia Soul with ocean blue with a black top. It was just so cute. I had my little dog in the car with me. We were just tootling along in a little neighborhood, and out of nowhere, this kid ran a stop sign and hit me. And I'd never been in an accident before, so it was such a shock. I mean, I'm sure it is for anybody who's in a car accident. But in that moment, I was like, wow. And I couldn't get my door open. My dog was crying. There was smoke filling the car. I had a burn on my hand that I was watching happening in front of my eyes. I had a really severe whiplash and I couldn't breathe. And finally, the paramedics got there. They got me out of the car. Someone took my dog. They took me by ambulance to the hospital. They checked me and said, okay, go home. I did. And I thought all I had was a sprained wrist and a severe whiplash and a burn. And so I just continued on pushing, pushing, pushing. I went to pick my mother up in California. I drove 10 hours in one day until one day I fell and realized, oh my gosh, I've been tripping a lot. I'm dizzy. I'm not fully present in my body. And that's when they diagnosed me with a concussion. So the thing about concussion is that you do have to rest and let your brain heal, which I hadn't done. It was a month later that they diagnosed me with that. And by the time they did, it was still 2 months before I could get into anybody who could actually figure out how much damage there was and what they could do. And by that time, it had turned into post-concussion syndrome, which is a mild traumatic brain injury. So I had started at that point. My doctor's like, you can't work. You need to rest your brain. I didn't work anymore. I had 6 months of thinking, how, okay, I'll get better, and I didn't. I was using up all of my resources. I was living off of my credit cards. I had used up all of my savings, and I had huge expenses, and I was single and alone. And so then at one point, I finally started doing my eye and ear therapy, and that threw me into a commotion in my brain that made me so dizzy I couldn't get out of bed for 8 days. And prior to that, I had experiences of myself, but I didn't know what they were. I had no discernment. It was other people's experience of me in that I realized there was something really wrong with me. I was reacting in ways I didn't normally react. I would be sitting in a coffee shop with friends, which I love to do, and suddenly I couldn't understand what they were saying. I would say things, I would make up words and not realize that I had made up words. I would forget things and not realize I'd forgot things. Or I'd say things and then immediately people go, why would you say that? And I didn't even know what I had said. So there was this whole thing that was happening in my brain that I was completely out of control with. And it's amazing how much the brain does that we are so unconscious of. It regulates your heartbeat and your breathing rate and your body temperature and your blood pressure and your digestion. I mean, everything was affected. When my brain was focusing on listening to somebody, all of a sudden I'd get cold, I'd get hot, because it couldn't do more than two or three things at a time. So it was really interesting. Anyway, I ended up in the hospital after 8 days of this severe dizziness, and it was then that they did a very special kind of MRI and found that I had two huge aneurysms in my brain, right about there. And my blood pressure was through the roof, and they sent me home with instructions to talk to a neurosurgeon 6 hours away. And in the meantime, to maintain a very low blood pressure, to do absolutely nothing but sit in the dark, no TV, no computer, no groups of people and all that. And I did that for about 3 months. And the only thing I did during that time was go to my doctor once a week to have this brain therapy. And very, very slowly, I started to get a little bit better. And then I had to have brain surgery. Well, during that time, I also met a man who was very kind and very generous and who really wanted to take care of me, which was something I really needed. I had spent all this time alone. I had gone through all my money. My kids did a GoFundMe that helped for a while. I borrowed money from people that I still owe. I couldn't start working until about January of this year is when I finally started to feel like me again, and even more, to the point where I realized in this relationship with this man who was taking care of me that he needed me to be not okay so he could take care of me. And I needed him to control my life so I could get better. And as I did get better, I realized I didn't need that anymore. That I started to have a different experience of myself. I started realizing that I had put all my trust once again in somebody else rather than in my own self, knowing what I wanted, what I needed, what I felt, what I'd said, how I'd reacted, all those things that were finally coming online again as my brain was starting to heal. And so there was an event. And that is the next part of my story. So until then, keep in mind that what I was learning through all of these years was how I had betrayed myself over and over again, how I had given away my truth, given away my power, how I had lacked a balance, internal balance of my masculine and my feminine. So I was flip-flopping from one to the other, which was not conducive to my best well-being or to who I truly am. And so that's the next chapter. Till then, be kind to yourself.